This is a really cool olive tree. However, I've had it for almost 3 years and I'm still struggling what to do with it. When I initially got it, it was really unhealthy. I knew it, and that is also why I got it. So in the first year, that's 2 years ago, I took it out of the pot and I repotted it. At that time I realized there were very few roots and I had to use a screw to place it into the pot. Now 2 years have passed, the tree has recovered, it is growing quite strongly. It's not super, but it is growing. And now I think it is time to look at the roots again, decide upon the final planting angle and maybe another pot. But before I do that, I'm going to also work here on the Deadwood, because this really, it is just a cut stump and I need to work it out. So this Deadwood stump here, as said, has just been cut. And in fact, this branch here is alive, that branch is alive, but here on this area, nothing is alive. And when I initially planted it up 2 years ago, I left all of this in place because, you know, you never know whether there's a bud going to pop. But right now I think it is time to start lifting off this bark that's there. And I know it is old and it looks nice and it's nice and broken up and rough, but underneath it water accumulates and therefore the wood gets all wet, can start rotting. Animals find it a nice hiding place and they start boring into the wood. So it is good if the bark starts to die off to really remove these slivers of that bark. I'm just using hand tools because I really want to emphasize the natural decay of the wood. So here I find a piece of bark that seems to be quite well connected to the wood. So I'm just going to leave that alone. Over time it will come off and then sliver by sliver I can take it away. So this is an old branch that has been broken out and you can see here in the wood little lines. That is where it is naturally starting to fall apart. And I'm going to try and use these areas to tear off the wood. So here there's a little crack. I'm just putting an old piece of pliers. I'm just trying to split it and then pull it away. This is going to cause new wounds and the wood underneath it won't look as nice and decayed. But over time that will also come. So I'm not going to try anything artificial here. I'm just pulling it off and letting the wood break off where it wants to. Keep in mind, wood normally breaks downward instead of upwards. So when you're tearing at it, also use a downwards motion, right? So by not cutting the fibers, but pulling the fibers, you create natural breaking points and you reduce the sign of tool work. And especially with this very old Deadwood, I find it very important to reduce signs of manual work on it. And here my aim is of course to thin this part off so it doesn't look like it was cut off by a saw, but just by natural wear and tear. So really breaking up this profile here at the end. When it comes to design of a bonsai, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. One of them is if you have a lot of deadwood, it is always nice to see the live vein, especially where it reaches the ground. So that would mean that this could be a front of the tree. The problem, however, is if I do that, then we have this piece of deadwood that comes straight at you. And I don't want this to be an eye poker. I know that in the previous video I said, then it comes nice towards you and you could plant it up like this, something like this. And you see that there's a lot of nice movement, but what you also see is there's a lot of deadwood here on this side that might actually interfere with being a nice tree. The deadwood here at the bottom, that is then going to be in the ground, so that is all downside, right? So planting it more like this, then you still see the live vein and you see the tree, then a lot of the movement is gone and still this deadwood comes towards you. Now I know that at some point I can try to bend this, but I'm therefore still thinking about going more towards this direction. Then the deadwood moves away from me. I have two tops here. This lower branch is the strongest, and here is a small one in the top that is weaker. And over time I can reduce this big one to just these side branches here, and then have the top one grow out a little bit more. I think this is what I'll aim for, but I have to see what the roots look like, because as I already said in the previous repotting, I had lots and lots of trouble. Let me get this out of the pot, clean it up, and then see what sort of pot would be useful. But this is a good angle, except for that now the live vein disappears here in the back. But besides that, I now have nice movement. I have the top of the tree coming towards me. The deadwood is pointing away. It is not extremely tall, and actually the tree moves upward over the whole length. If I get to bend this, then I can actually bend it down a little bit more. But for now, I think this is what I'll do. Of course, I could shorten this deadwood, right? I could just cut it off here or even there. But to me, this is one of the interesting features of the tree and makes it a different tree than normal. Now you may have noticed that I am doing this in my t-shirt outside. So it is summer. And I do this in summer because olives just respond a lot better to root work in early summer. They are heat-loving species, and here we don't get a lot of heat. And the last couple of months it has been really, really wet. And actually this is one of the first weekends that it is nice, and it's the first week of July. I don't know what's happening. And with the tree out of the pot, it becomes very, very clear why this tree was not growing all as well. All these roots are actually not of the olive. These are all of this horrible weed, and they basically just take all the nutrients that I put on the pot. Next to that, the substrate, it is very wet. There's a lot of organics in there and a lot of decomposed akadama, so that's all not that great. And as said, look at these roots. That's not very much. In fact, it is now making me decide I'm going to plant it much more vertical, because on this side, all this deadwood, there's nothing good about it. Here's the screw that I used last year to attach the tree into the pot, and I am going to keep it in place. I will shorten this bit of deadwood a little bit so I can plant it more vertical into the pot. And I think that will be the new planting angle. Now for potting up, I am not sure. I don't think this is going to be the final pot. I don't really like the design, but it is a little bit deeper, and therefore hopefully it provides a little bit more stability. And I'm going to fill the pot with substrate that is very, very high in pumice. Now pumice is hopefully the sort of substrate that olives like. Well, actually I know it is a substrate that they like. As you can see, it is not well sifted, so I'm going to have to wash it out very well after planting up. Now in the previous potting of this olive, I already realized it's a very difficult tree to pot up. And one of the main reasons is all the roots are on this one side, and on the other side of the trunk there's nothing. So I'm just going to slide it in here, I suppose. Put it on some substrate, just like that. And then I need to figure out how am I ever going to connect this. So I have this one screw here that I can use. There's a few smaller roots here that I can use as support. And then I think most of the stability needs to come from the substrate. I have a few pieces of wood that were in the original pot, and I might reuse to stabilize it by just squeezing it in here, just like that. And then it should become stable enough to stay in the pot for another year or two. And then I'll have to check again. Let's do this. I'm afraid I'm not going to show this on camera because this is going to be very awkward and I can't focus on the camera and the tree at the same time. Tree health comes first. And I'm still not sure whether this is going to be the front. I really don't like how this deadwood comes forward and the living part goes backwards. I do like, however, this live vein here really entering the soil. I can turn it a little bit like this, but then you really see this lump of deadwood and a very narrow part here. And to get this part as thin as that requires a lot of removal of material. So for now, that's also not great. If I flip it all the way around, this does look like a nice front. It has lots of movement. You see here the live vein, but it disappears here in the back. Here, there's a nice front. There's these big branches and this top that I could grow out a little bit larger and fill it out into this direction. This to me is, well, the second option. A third option would be to go even further towards this direction. But then again, you get this very narrow side here. So to me, option number 2 is the front. What do you think? Option 1, 2 or 3? So looking from that side, from this side, or from that side. Going to give it a little bit of fertilizer, and then it's going to go back into the full sun. And I hope that this reroots really, really well, and that in the next scene I can just give you an update from the end of summer to show you how this has grown, and who knows, maybe then I get around to styling it. But I think that will be next summer. I think I want to give this time to power up a little bit, get those roots established, get some extension growth on there, and then, yeah, make definite choices on styling. So that means if I'm not doing it in this video, there is still time for you to say, which front should I take? And at the end of summer, the tree has dealt pretty well with it. I am not fully happy with how much it has grown. There are some young growing tips in there. So it is pushing, but it's not pushing brilliantly. The deadwood, well, I think it looks pretty good. Another 1 or 2 years of deterioration, and you won't see that it was man-made. And in spring, I can probably start styling this. This is a front, maybe? I think it will push well in spring though.